There is a version of history where wars are decided on battlefields, where armies meet, where the stronger side wins, where the outcome is written in blood and geography and the cold arithmetic of men and weapons and supply lines. That version of history is not wrong, but it is incomplete, because behind almost every war that has ever been fought, behind every conflict that history remembers as a clash of armies and ideologies and nations, there is another story, a quieter story. A story of rooms where candles burned late into the night, where men who would never see a battlefield leaned over tables and made the decisions that determined who would win and who would lose before a single soldier knew the outcome had already been arranged. The secret deal, the private negotiation, the agreement that no official record was supposed to preserve, the handshake in the dark that changed everything. History is full of these moments, but most of them stay secret. Most of them are burned, buried, denied. Most of them only emerge, if they emerge at all, decades or centuries later, when the people who made them are dead and the institutions they served have had time to construct a more comfortable narrative. Tonight we are going to talk about one that did emerge, one that historians have pieced together from fragments, from intercepted letters, from coded dispatches, from the private diaries of people who were in the room and could not resist writing down what they had witnessed. We are going to talk about the Sykes-Picot Agreement, and we are going to talk about what it actually was, not the sanitized diplomatic history, not the version taught in universities as a regrettable but understandable wartime expedient, but the full account of what was promised, to whom, what was broken, what was betrayed, and how the consequences of a few hours of negotiation in London and Paris in 1916 are still being lived out in blood and fire more than a century later. This is the secret deal that changed a war, and then changed the world. The year is 1914. The First World War has just begun. The Ottoman Empire, the vast, aging, increasingly fragile empire that controlled the Middle East, had ruled from Anatolia to Arabia for 4 centuries, has entered the war on the side of Germany and the Austro-Hungarian Empire. This is a catastrophic mistake for the Ottomans, as it will turn out. But in 1914, it does not look like a mistake. It looks like an opportunity. The Ottomans are being squeezed from every direction. The empire has been losing territory for a century, losing it to European powers, losing it to nationalist movements within its own borders, losing it to the slow rot of internal dysfunction and corruption. Siding with Germany offers a chance to reverse that decline, to retake lost ground, to reassert Ottoman power in a world that had been steadily diminishing it. The British and French have their own calculations. The Ottoman Empire controls territory that both powers desperately want: the routes to India, the oil fields that are just beginning to reveal their significance, the Suez Canal, the land bridge between Europe and Asia. If the Ottomans can be defeated, and they can be defeated, of that the British and French are increasingly confident, then the question of who gets what becomes the most important question in the world. Enter Mark Sykes. Sir Mark Sykes was a British politician and amateur Middle East expert, emphasis on amateur, as his critics have never stopped pointing out. He was charming, energetic, opinionated, and possessed of the absolute confidence in his own judgments that characterized the British ruling class of his era. He had traveled in the Middle East. He had opinions about the Arabs and the Turks and the geography of the region. He was exactly the kind of man that the British Foreign Office in 1915 thought was perfectly qualified to decide the fate of millions of people he had never asked for their opinion. François-Georges Picot was his French counterpart, a career diplomat, more cautious than Sykes, more rigidly concerned with French national interest, but equally unbothered by the question of what the people who actually lived in the territory being divided might want for themselves. The two men met. They negotiated. They drew lines. The Sykes-Picot Agreement, finalized in May 1916, divided the Arab territories of the Ottoman Empire into British and French spheres of influence. The British would get what is now Iraq, Jordan, and the area around Haifa. The French would get what is now Syria and Lebanon. Palestine would be under international administration of some kind. The details were vague, deliberately so, because both sides wanted it and neither was willing to fully commit to the other having it. The lines were drawn on a map. The map did not correspond to the actual geography of the people who lived there. The lines cut through tribal territories, through ancient communities, through watersheds and trade routes, and the invisible but intensely real boundaries of how people actually organized their lives. The lines were drawn by two men who were not from there, had not asked the people there, and were operating on the assumption that the people there did not have the standing to be consulted. But here is the thing that makes Sykes-Picot not just a diplomatic agreement, but a betrayal of extraordinary proportions. The agreement was secret. The people of the Arab world did not know about it. And crucially, this is the knife in the back. The Hashemite leaders of the Arab Revolt did not know about it. The Arab Revolt was one of the most extraordinary developments of the First World War. Sharif Hussein of Mecca, the guardian of Islam's holiest cities, had been negotiating with the British, specifically with Sir Henry McMahon, the British High Commissioner in Egypt, about the terms under which the Arab people would rise against the Ottomans. Hussein was a sophisticated political operator. He was not simply offering to help the British, he was negotiating. And what he was negotiating for was Arab independence, a unified Arab state, or confederation of states covering the Arabian Peninsula and the Fertile Crescent, the territories that the Ottoman Empire currently controlled and that the British were fighting to take. The Hussein-McMahon Correspondence, a series of letters exchanged between 1915 and 1916, is one of the most debated documents in the history of the modern Middle East. What exactly did the British promise? The letters are ambiguous, deliberately ambiguous, in the way that only experienced British diplomats could achieve, promising enough to secure Arab cooperation while leaving enough wiggle room to deny that any specific commitment had been made. But Hussein read the letters as a promise of Arab independence. He launched the Arab Revolt in June 1916. His son Faisal led armies, guided in part by a young British liaison officer named T.E. Lawrence, who would become famous as Lawrence of Arabia, across the deserts of the Hijaz and northward toward Damascus. Lawrence knew about Sykes-Picot. He had been told, or had deduced, that the Arab Revolt was being fought for promises that the British had no intention of keeping. He wrote about this in his memoir 7 Pillars of Wisdom, one of the most anguished documents in the literature of betrayal. He knew, as he rode with Faisal's army, as he encouraged the Arabs to fight and die for their independence, that independence was not what awaited them. He did it anyway. He told himself it was necessary. He told himself that perhaps the promises could still be kept. He told himself a lot of things that he didn't fully believe. The Arab armies fought, they bled, they took Damascus in October 1918, and for a brief, extraordinary moment, it seemed as if the promises might be kept after all. Faisal entered Damascus. Arab flags flew over the city. The dream of Arab independence felt, for a few weeks, like it might become real. And then the diplomats arrived. The Paris Peace Conference of 1919 was where the secret deals came into the open. Sykes-Picot, which had been leaked by the Bolsheviks after the Russian Revolution, published in newspapers, denied and then acknowledged by the British and French, was now the framework within which the post-war settlement would be constructed. Faisal came to Paris. He made his case before the assembled powers of the world. He was articulate, dignified, and utterly without leverage. The British and French had already decided what was going to happen. Faisal could speak, and he did. But the outcome had been determined in that private meeting in London in 1916 when two men drew their lines on a map. The borders that Sykes and Picot had drawn, adjusted somewhat, refined somewhat, but fundamentally intact, became the political geography of the modern Middle East. Faisal was briefly made king of Syria. The French removed him within months. The British then made him king of Iraq, a consolation prize, a new country assembled from 3 Ottoman provinces that had no natural coherence as a political unit, but that was convenient for British strategic and petroleum interests. His brother Abdullah was made ruler of Transjordan, another new country, another artificial construct, another arrangement designed primarily around British interests rather than the preferences of the people who lived there. And Palestine. Palestine was the deepest wound. The Balfour Declaration of 1917, issued a year after Sykes-Picot, another private decision made without consulting the people most affected, had promised British support for a Jewish homeland in Palestine. It had been issued for reasons that combined genuine sympathy for Zionist aspirations with calculated assessments of British strategic interest and the influence of Jewish communities in the United States and Russia. The Balfour Declaration and the Sykes-Picot Agreement were not coordinated. They pointed in different directions. They created commitments that could not both be honored. The British made promises to the Arabs of Palestine, promises to the Zionists, and promises to the French, and these promises were mutually incompatible, and yet they were all made. And the incompatibility was not resolved. It was simply left in the region, like an unexploded ordnance, to be dealt with by the people who lived there. T.E. Lawrence testified at the Paris Peace Conference. He wore Arab robes. He translated for Faisal. He was a figure of enormous public fame by then. The romantic hero of the Desert War, the British officer who had gone native, who had led Arab armies across the desert. His celebrity gave him a platform. It did not give him power. He watched the betrayal be completed. He watched the map of the Middle East be drawn by people who had never lived there, in service of interests that had nothing to do with the people whose lives would be shaped by those lines. He resigned from the British government shortly after. He spent the rest of his life in something that looked very much like penance, enlisting in the RAF under a false name, avoiding fame, writing and rewriting his account of what had happened until he died in a motorcycle accident in 1935. The lines that Sykes and Picot drew did not hold forever. They held long enough to shape everything. The modern states of Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, Jordan, all of them are products of those lines. The borders that cut through tribal territories, that put Sunni and Shia and Kurd into the same political units without their consent, that created countries whose populations had no particular reason to think of themselves as belonging to the same nation. Those borders became the context within which every subsequent conflict in the region played out. The Iraqi state that the British assembled from 3 Ottoman provinces, Baghdad, Basra, and Mosul, never achieved the internal coherence that national identity requires. Its history from the moment of its creation has been a history of managing, through force and patronage and fear, the fundamental incompatibility of the communities that were put inside its borders. Syria, Lebanon, the Palestinian question, the Kurdish people, divided between 4 countries, promised their own state in the 1920 Treaty of Sèvres and then denied it when the geopolitical winds shifted, still living with the consequences of promises made and broken in Paris and London a century ago. None of this was inevitable. There were other ways to organize the post-war Middle East. There were voices, Arab voices, minority voices, the voices of communities who had lived in these territories for generations and understood their complexity, who offered different visions. Those voices were not heard. They were not heard because the decision had already been made, in secret, in 1916, by 2 men with a map and the absolute conviction that they knew best. Mark Sykes died in 1919 during the influenza pandemic at the age of 39. He did not live to see the full consequences of what he had drawn. He died before the British mandate in Palestine descended into violence. He died before the Iraqi kingdom collapsed into coup and counter-coup. He died before Syria fragmented. He died before any of it. His coffin was exhumed in 2008 so that scientists could study his preserved remains for research into the 1918 influenza virus. The man who had drawn the lines across the Middle East was dug up so that we could study a pandemic. History has a way of making its ironies visible if you wait long enough. The Sykes-Picot Agreement is not a secret anymore. It has been analyzed, debated, and condemned for a century. Every serious historian of the modern Middle East has grappled with it. It is taught in universities. It is referenced in newspaper editorials. It is named by politicians across the Arab world as one of the foundational injustices of the modern era, and yet its consequences have never been undone. The lines are still there. The borders drawn by 2 men who were not from there and did not ask are still the borders that armies fight over, that refugees cross, that define which community controls which resources and which people are inside and which are outside. The secret deal is not secret anymore, but the damage it did is still being done. This is what it means when we say that history is not the past. The decisions made in that London room in 1916 are not history in the sense of something finished and done. They are the architecture of the present. They are the reason that the news from the Middle East looks the way it looks. They are the shape of the container within which every subsequent war, every displacement, every communal conflict has occurred. You cannot understand the present without understanding the secret deal. And you cannot understand the secret deal without understanding what was promised, what was broken, who paid the price, and who decided that the people who paid the price didn't need to be consulted. History is written by the powerful. The Sykes-Picot Agreement was written by the powerful, and its consequences are lived by everyone else. This is Veil of History. The curtain never fully closes on stories like this one. We will see you on the other side.